All right, you're watching CBS News 24/7. Just to update you as to what has happened in recent moments. Of course, we know that President-elect Donald Trump wanted Matt Gaetz, the former Florida congressman, to become our nation's next attorney general. Well, that was disruptive, to say the very least. That got Matt Gaetz side by side with Vice President-elect J.D. Vance to go door to door to talk to Republicans who would put Mr. Gaetz through the confirmation process in the midst of so many allegations, so many things in a House ethics report still unseen by the general public. And now 24 hours later, that statement on X by Matt Gaetz saying that he is choosing to pull himself out of contention to be the next Attorney General of the United States. We're also sort of seeing a congruent tone here. Matt Gaetz essentially saying he doesn't want to be a distraction, and then followed up by President-elect Donald Trump, who is also saying Matt Gaetz did not want to be a distraction, and therefore thanking him and saying he wishes to see what he will do in the future. So let's now go to Margaret Talev. She is with us right now to talk to us. I'm going to move over here because we've got her popping up on that screen. Margaret, nice to have you with us on CBS News 24/7, back with us once again. Any reaction from where you sit to the statement by President-elect Donald Trump? I saw it and I felt like it was a more tempered statement than we usually see when he's digging in his heels.
Well, I think he's seen the writing on the wall, at least for the last couple of days, perhaps always from the outset. This was always a two-pronged approach. One was to see whether he could convince Republican senators to put their concerns aside or take a long break and allow Matt Gaetz to enter that job. But the other, more broadly, was to see how far he can push the GOP incoming Senate majority to bend to his will in general, right out of the gate. And I think as an early test, we have seen some limits here. There are a couple of other nominees that are going to be tested as well. And I think one big question now is going to be who will be the president-elect's ultimately successful nominee for the attorney general position. It's an incredibly important role, obviously, and Donald Trump has indicated that he wants, to some extent, to be able to use that role to go after what he sees as resistance or critics inside of government, or to end what he would describe as the so-called weaponization of the Justice Department. Others would disagree with that characterization. And we know that Trump already has named a couple of his own personal lawyers as well to roles in the Justice Department. So I think we need to watch and see where that goes. Is it possible he may seek to elevate someone like that? Would he seek to draw a Republican from Congress or the Senate? There are a lot of unanswered questions at this point.
Well, and you know, it's one thing for you and I to talk about this on television and streaming on a broadcast that reaches every household in the world. But it's another thing to think about the people who are getting this news on their phones, or maybe in a coffee shop or in the doctor's office. And I have to think about them. Nobody has a smell test like the American people. And when you see Mr. Gaetz' statement on X and you see the president-elect statement, you see two messages that seem to have some coordination. We'll never know if they were coordinated. But that is that this was a decision by Matt Gaetz. He didn't want to be a distraction. Do you think that's going to pass the smell test for the people of the United States, who are also aware that Mr. Gaetz was in the halls of Congress and essentially seeing if he had the support or if he didn't?
I think it's just a reminder that what politicians say, either as a coordinated front or on their own, and what's actually happening in reality and behind the scenes are often quite different. And there is President-elect Trump is sort of a master marketer. He is an intensely practiced television communicator, and he knows that sort of the shock and awe, move fast, and act very convinced that what you want is what's going to happen, is generally puts you on the best footing to make those things happen. But there are still limits about what can pass muster with this Senate or the incoming Senate. And I think we're beginning, to see some of that. And whether the message was coordinated or not, isn't really as important as the fact that behind the scenes, Republican senators were telling Matt Gaetz and President-elect Trump and the Trump transition team, we can't do this one. This one is not going to happen. There's another issue, too, that I think bears watching. We're seeing both in this case and in the case of Pete Hegseth's nomination for defense secretary, although these are different facts, different candidates, different cases, the idea of this argument that if the Justice Department does not bring charges against you, you're therefore cleared of the allegations. And I think it's important to remember that in the history of the United States, the test for Senate confirmation of nominees, especially to a top-tier cabinet position, has never been simply, did you get criminally charged or convicted of something? It's also about conduct and whether your background makes you susceptible to being compromised in any way.
Nice to have you here on CBS News 24/7. For our viewers who are just logging on or joining us, we want to get to that post on social media by former Florida Congressman Matt Gaetz and just let you see it for yourself. It's one thing to tell you the headline. It's another thing to show you where we're sourcing it. He says, quote, "I had excellent meetings with senators yesterday. I appreciate their thoughtful feedback and what he characterizes as the incredible support of so many. While the momentum was strong, it is clear," Mr. Gaetz says, "that my confirmation was unfairly becoming a distraction to the critical work of the Trump-Vance transition. There is no time," he says, "to waste on needlessly protracted Washington scuffle. Thus, I will be withdrawing my name from consideration to serve as Attorney General." He went on to say, "Trump's DOJ must be in place and ready on day one," and then says, "I remain fully committed to see that Donald J. Trump is the most successful president in history. I will forever," he closes, "be honored that President Trump nominated me to lead the Department of Justice, and I'm certain he will save America." Let's go back to Nikole Killion, CBS News Congressional correspondent. Nikole talks to many sources there on the Hill. Listen, the lawmakers behind closed doors saw that post on social media about the same time we did, and you're getting some new reaction.
Yeah, well, we just heard from Jim Jordan, who is a close ally of Matt Gaetz, has served with him on the House Judiciary Committee. And when our producer and other reporters asked him for reaction about Matt Gaetz withdrawing his name from consideration, his immediate reaction was, huh. And he went on to say that, unless this must have been a decision, that was reached by Matt Gaetz and or the president-elect, but he described Matt Gaetz as a talented individual, but he did seem to be kind of taken aback by the decision. Obviously, as I mentioned, somebody like Jordan is more of a booster of Gaetz, but, that being said, there are other senators here on Capitol Hill who feel like this wasn't surprising. It was going to be an uphill climb as far as this confirmation battle, especially given the drip of information that was starting to come out, whether that's, awaiting the potential details of this House Ethics Committee review, which again the committee thus far has made a decision or couldn't reach a consensus on whether or not to release its report. Over here in the Senate, you had Dick Durbin, the head of the Senate Judiciary Committee, who had asked the FBI for its file on Matt Gaetz because, of course, prior to this House ethics investigation, there was also a federal investigation that had been underway for some time related to allegations of sex trafficking. And while the Department of Justice didn't continue down the path of that investigation or file any charges against Gaetz, that was something that Democrats on the Judiciary Committee were seeking. So I say all that to say that a lot of lawmakers here on Capitol Hill were after information on Matt Gaetz, and so it was clear that this was starting to become an avalanche that just couldn't stop in terms of some of these allegations.
So Jim Jordan says, huh? In the world of newspapers, that would save a whole lot of ink in the printing for sure. In old Washington, Jim Jordan, others in the Trump camp would have all coordinated and talked beforehand. But we're in a new Washington. We are in disruptor Washington. Do you read his response as maybe that he did not know before this was posted on social media?
Oh, well, I don't want to speculate about any conversations that may or may not have occurred behind the scenes. I think the main thing that was striking to me in terms of Matt Gaetz' statement and taking himself out of the running is covering Capitol Hill and having encountered Matt Gaetz many times here over the years here on the Hill. There have been several instances where we have asked him about the ethics investigation, about the allegations made in this ethics investigation, as well as when the Department of Justice was conducting its own investigation into Matt Gaetz, and time and again he denied the allegations, he denied any wrongdoing, and acted like that he had no culpability. So the fact that he is taking this step back to withdraw his name, I didn't see anything in the statement of necessarily denying some of those allegations that have been out there, even though he has been very forthright about doing that. He has kind of acted that, hey, I'm being the one victimized here in all of these probes. And so that is probably what I found was most interesting, that he made this decision to step back when he has so staunchly defended these allegations against him over the years.
Nikole, Killion, thank you so much. Nice to have that conversation with you. I have a feeling you and I will be talking a lot, maybe even in the hour to come. Thank you so much for checking in with us on that. All right, so let's bring in CBS News' Finn Gómez right now to deepen this conversation. And let's have the conversation, Finn, from the point of view of strategy. 24 hours ago, Matt Gaetz was knocking on doors of lawmakers. There was a ground game there. There was strategy there, even the vice president-elect next to him for those meetings. Fast forward to today, Pete Hegseth is having similar meetings and also some controversies following him. What do you see from a political standpoint? What does the Trump camp do now, knowing that Mr. Hegseth is having essentially the same process today as Mr. Gaetz yesterday?
Well, I think if you look at Gaetz first, Reed, if you look at that, I think a part of this, there was in speaking to some people close to the transition, that from the onset they knew that this pick would be problematic, right? Some of these questions about Gaetz have been swirling for a while. We've known about the House investigation, ethics investigation for some time. Of course, the previous federal investigation into some of these allegations as well. So we knew it was problematic. Trump wanted unconventional picks, he wanted unorthodox picks, but he also wanted a loyalist, someone who could come in and sort of clean house from what he calls the deep state, those who are what he claims are against him politically within the organization institution of the Department of Justice. But what we were hearing is that this also could be a tactic, a ploy to have him, he goes in, he gets knocked down, and then it could mean that behind him is a more palatable pick for AG, right? And that would get through, but you still get someone who just by contrast seems like a more palatable, more favorable pick that could get through the Senate, right? No accusations that we're hearing, none of the stuff that we heard from the House investigation. So like the next wave is what could come. I did speak to a former Republican official who was a high-ranking Republican official, justice official from Trump 1.0, who told me that they were concerned about who that person could be, just because of it would be somebody who was more sort of attuned to what the president-elect may want, and this is of course from a Republican official, and so they were sort of cautious about who that next pick would be. Also, just politically, as you mentioned, Reed, there's no doubt, and there's been no question either that Matt Gaetz has some political ambition in his home state of Florida. We all know he stepped down from his House seat because of this pick by the president-elect. But he does have political interest. We're hearing to run in Florida. There's a gubernatorial seat that's going to come up soon, gubernatorial race that's going to come up soon, and with that MAGA support, with the support of the president-elect, he could potentially do well there.
You speak of that dynamic. I guess if you boil it to the bones, it could be, okay, not this guy, but maybe this guy. Could that same dynamic then speak to what lawmakers experience when they drill down on Pete Hegseth, given the recent reportings out of Monterey, California, and that report that is also a part of the narrative?
I think with Pete Hegseth, it's a little bit different. I don't think they fully understood about some of these issues that are now coming up. I don't think they fully vetted this. To a degree, yes, and that's essentially what we're hearing. But Pete Hegseth was also very well known throughout the Trump world, very well known throughout the Republican Party and of course from conservatives because of his position at Fox on the weekends as being the Fox and Friends weekend host, right? One of the co-hosts there. And he's also been a very, very staunch defender of Trump. And what Trump wants a lot, what the president-elect wants, is he wants effective communicators in these top cabinet positions for him, loyalists close to him, people close to the MAGA base. And I think primarily that is what you're seeing here. So I think it's a little bit different, at least in its intention and at the outset. But with some of these new details coming forward over the last 24 hours, will this spell some more, turbulence for Hegseth's, nomination or his pick to head DOD? I mean, it could be. Obviously, these are some major obstacles that we're now seeing. That politically could be difficult, but from what we're hearing is that there's still a staunch defense for Hegseth, at least for now. But again, in the aftermath of Gaetz, let's see where this lands.
Speaking of Gaetz, I want to get your reaction. If we can put this up on a full screen, President-elect Donald Trump going to social media, timed release after Mr. Gaetz saying he is pulling out of contention there. Donald J. Trump there on social media saying, "I greatly appreciate the recent efforts of Matt Gaetz in seeking approval to be Attorney General. He was doing very well, but at the same time, he did not want to be a distraction for the administration, for which he has much respect. Matt has a wonderful future," says the president-elect, and he goes on to say he looks forward to watching all of the great things he will do. Exclamation point there on Truth Social by the president-elect. Your reaction, Finn?
Well, again, like that last part of it, it may not just be a favorable end to this, to this trajectory for AG, but it could allude to the fact that there is again maybe some political viability in his home state of Florida, right? Even though this has essentially gone down in flames, his candidacy essentially to be Attorney General, I think that there is still some political opportunities in his home state of Florida, that Trump has done very well there. Obviously, that's his home state now, of course, and where Republicans have been doing very well politically over the last few cycles. So that's something to watch, and especially now in this sort of Trumplican party that they are now in this sort of where it's seemingly like traditionally this kind of thing could be the end for a political career. Right. But as we've seen, even with the president-elect, there is some political. It could be like a political Lazarus here. Wow.
You make me think of those Access Hollywood tapes. Finn Gómez, thank you so much for talking to us. Our team, we march to your drum and we appreciate your leadership. Thank you so much for talking to us.